maybe getting...
You can't always.
This is the death.
Remarkably empty.
Turn back. Towards God. Rise up.
Welcome to Vital Signs, your prescription for a healthy family, where members of the Catholic Medical Association explore medical topics vital to the health of you and your family members. I'm Dr. Tom McGovern, the host of Vital Signs, brought to you by Shalom World TV. Today, we explore what makes people happy and how the use of social media affects our joy. All people seek joy, which is greater than pleasure when life feels good, and greater even than happiness when life goes well. Joy is the result of a life lived well. But what do the latest insights of psychology have to say about how social media helps or inhibits us from living such a good life? A life that includes not only positive emotions, but also engagement with our activities, positive relationships, accomplishments, and a sense of meaning. Over 3 billion of us use social media for an average of 2 hours a day. That adds up to over 5 years of an average lifespan. Worldwide, over 210 million people suffer from social media addiction, and young single females are at greatest risk. Addicted people may be one of 71% of Americans who sleep with or next to a mobile device, or half of drivers who report using their smartphones to check social media. Let's explore with today's guest how, despite social media's pervasive reality, we can live a joyful and meaningful life. Today's guest is Dr. Francie Broghammer, Chief Psychiatry Resident at the University of California at Irvine. Francie, welcome to Vital Signs.
Thanks for having me, Tom. I'm so excited to be here chatting with you today.
Francie, there's a whole branch of psychology that's devoted to understanding what makes people happy. How did this movement start, and why is it so important?
So this movement started in the mid to late 1990s when we realized that doctors and the medical community were spending a lot of time researching how to make sick people healthy. But there was little to no research on how to make healthy people live better lives or more fulfilling lives. So there was a gentleman, Martin Seligman, the then president of the American Psychological Association, who said, this doesn't seem right. There are certain communities out there that have people who are living longer, healthier, and happier lives than anyone else around them. So why don't we go and study what they're doing and see if we can learn some of their secrets, if you will, and then share that information with the rest of the world. And from this, positive psychology was birthed. And positive psychology is really the study of what it means to lead a full and flourishing life. And I think we're going to have the opportunity to talk a lot about it today, but I want to tell you one of the coolest things that Dr. Seligman found. And that was that our happiness at the end of the day is only 10% dependent on the world around us. And the other 90% is half made up by our genetics and the other half made up by how we perceive and respond to the world around us. And that's really what the core of positive psychology is. How do we perceive, respond, and interact with the world around us so that we can be happier and healthier?
Well, that's hopeful news, Francie. And when we think about being happy, there's actually several different emotions that come into play: pleasure, happiness, and joy. Are they different from each other?
Absolutely. And so let's break those down a little bit. Pleasure comes to mind first. And this is just like a fleeting emotional state, often brought on by something outside of you. So say, for example, if someone uses a Xanax, right, or a medication that just they want to feel better in the moment, they're going to feel a state of pleasure or euphoria, maybe the moment they take it, but it won't last very long, okay? It's not a perpetuated state of being. So that's a pleasant feeling, just chasing the emotion. Now, when we talk about happiness, we're talking about something a little bit deeper than that. And we're talking about knowing yourself and acting in a way that allows you to use what positive psychology would refer to as your signature strengths to achieve a state of emotional and personal satisfaction. So say, for example, you're a really accomplished violinist, right? Happiness here might look like getting up and practicing the violin, really perfecting a concerto, and the state of satisfaction that comes from that. And as you can imagine, that's a slightly more it's a slightly longer state than just like feeling pleasure for one moment. You're going to feel a sense of satisfaction that can last much more than a moment. We're talking hours to days to weeks to months, because it's a state of self-satisfaction. The last thing you brought up was joy, right? And I would say that this is kind of the pinnacle of the three. We've gone from pleasure to happiness, now to joy. And the difference here is that, once again, you're using your signature strengths, your God-given gifts, and you're using them for the benefit of others, really engaging with the world around you. So instead of just perfecting that concerto, all of a sudden, maybe you're giving a free concert in the park or at a school for underprivileged children who've never heard the violin before. And that's really going to induce something in you that might be permanent, that can never really be taken away. Whenever you think about that memory, it will induce a state of joy for you, because you used your gifts and your talents to give back to the world around you.
Francie, Dr. Seligman talks about 5 different elements of human well-being, and one of them is positive emotions, which we've been covering. Now, can people seek these positive emotions on their own, or are they only a byproduct of something else?
Both is the answer. So they definitely can be sought on their own, but if positive emotions are sought for positive emotions' sake, you're somewhat limited in really the reward and response you're going to get from that. Right? If you're saying, I'm just going to go to church so I can feel good about myself, guess what? You're leaving a lot on the table in that interaction, right? So I think that the other important thing about positive emotions, though, is that positive emotions allow us to think more creatively, engage more intentionally, build better and stronger relationships. So they really are a necessary precursor for all of the other things that allow us to lead these very full and happy lives. So yes, we don't want positive emotions just for positive emotions' sake, but we really have to work on cultivating a positive emotional state to lean in and to do the work that we're called to do.
So Francie, there's 4 other areas that are necessary for a fulfilling life, according to Seligman in his work. Let's cover each of those 4 briefly. The next one would be engagement. What does that mean?
So engagement, let's go back to maybe our violin example from earlier. And Neil Csikszentmihalyi, he coined this term of flow, right? Which means to be in a state of flow is to be loving an activity that you're doing so much you get lost when you're doing it. And all of a sudden you're doing that activity, not for some reward that you're going to get at the end, but for the sake of doing that activity in and of itself. So we're talking about maybe a runner's high, right? You get going and you just feel good and you want to keep going because you love what you're doing. You are lost in the activity. Oftentimes musicians can describe a similar experience. And this is an incredible sense of, like you said, engagement, right? We're doing an activity that allows us to engage our God-given gifts in a way that gives us a sense of meaning, purpose, accomplishment, etc. Sure,
we're often in the zone. Well, after engagement, they talk about accomplishment being a third area necessary for a fulfilling life. What does that mean?
Okay, so accomplishments, a couple things I want to talk about here, because sometimes people can say like, well, aren't accomplishments a little bit selfish, right? And here I want to point to the parable of the talents, right? God has given us certain gifts that are to be used to share with the world. And when we go out and we share with the world, accomplishments are a natural byproduct of that, right? And we are called to do that. So no, seeking accomplishments is not a selfish act. It's actually something that we are called to do. And now within accomplishments, there's 2 types of accomplishments. There's comparative and non-comparative. What I mean by this is comparative is you're running a race. Are you coming in first, second, or third, right? There's a very clear hierarchy there. Non-comparative is just kind of you judging or gauging for yourself. So instead of you running a race, are you coming in first, second, or third? It's you're going to run a mile as fast as you can, or you're going to try to beat the pace that you ran it yesterday by 10 seconds today. And what we find is that both are necessary to really lead to this sense of self-fulfillment that leads to a full life. But in our modern society, we're structured so that we have a lot more comparative achievement available to us, the non-comparative achievement. So it's really important that we lean into these opportunities to just push ourselves and to get better for the sake of getting better, to achieve for the sake of achieving, and just so that we might be the only ones that know that we did better today than we did yesterday. But that is so incredibly important for our overall sense of self and well-being.
The fourth area, relationships.
This is my favorite area, Tom. I'm so glad you asked. So relationships are the best medicine, and I swear that's backed by science. So I'm sure many people listening have heard of the Grant study, which is this really remarkable study that's been running out of Harvard for well over 80 years now. And they studied 900 men from the Boston area. I know. 900 men from the Boston area. And they just said from a young age, what's present in their lives? If we track them, is it the ones that made the most money or had the most college degrees or had the best health, that lived the longest or that were the happiest? And what they found is it didn't matter at the end of the day, looking back, how much money you had, what class you were born into, what part of the city you lived in. What mattered the most, the people that lived the longest, happiest, and most fulfilling lives were those who had the strongest relationships. Because we are not meant to live in isolation, right? We are creatures created to be in community with each other, sharing our gifts with each other for the benefit of others. And when we're able to really do this, to bolster relationships, build community in this way, guess what? We're rewarded. You're happier. You live longer. You're healthier. Who doesn't want that?
I certainly do, Francie. And then the last of those 5 areas is the need for meaning.
Right. And this is incredibly important. So this is what we're getting at when we started talking about earlier about joy, right? The ability to recognize we're called to do something bigger than ourselves. And you could maybe give a nod to Aristotle here with eudaimonia, right? This idea of a meaningful life, using the gifts that we're given for the benefit of others. Aristotle philosophized that this was kind of the ultimate state of happiness, and the ultimate goal in our lives was really to be able to engage and invest in this way. And this means, say, for example, I think if you're a physician, right, that's pretty easy to see what the meaning is in your job. You go to work every day and you're cutting cancer out of people's bodies, Tom, right? Like, that's amazing. You can see that you're making an impact and you're saving lives, right? Meaning is really rich in what you do. Sometimes I'll have patients come and they'll be like, yeah, that's great. You're a doctor. There's lots of meaning in what you do, but I'm just a mechanic, right? And that's one way to look at it. I'm just a mechanic, right? But let's look at that a little bit closer. That mechanic who might be coming to me in a difficult state is actually working to help optimize transportation so that entire families can get around, so that you and I can go to work. We couldn't do what we do without him, right? And so how are you able to look outside of the immediate picture right in front of you and say, how am I contributing to the world and the people around me? And that's what meaning is. And that's really not only from like, are you feeling good now? Are you leading a full life? But when we talk about job burnout, that's one of the most important anecdotes to that, because if you can find meaning in what you do, it's much easier to go back day after day after day.
Now, let's see what we've learned about what makes us happy if it applies to social media, which is just everywhere. What is the relationship between social media, which people seem to enjoy when they start, but seem to not enjoy so much the more they get into it?
Good question. I think you and many people listening might know the answer to that. Because instinctively we understand it's something that's kind of fun up front, but with time, there's diminishing returns. We're not enjoying it as much. Maybe it's impacting us more negatively. And research supports exactly what you just hypothesized. And that's that there's actually studies really fascinating showing the more likes people have on social media, the more likes that they give towards other people's photos or posts, etc., is inversely related to their level of happiness. Meaning the more time you spend or the more engagement you have on social media, the less happy you are in real life. And I think that's a fascinating and very, very telling statistic.
So do people actually get addicted to social media?
Absolutely. And you know what's interesting is it doesn't really look that different from many other things you get addicted to. The addiction to social media looks like that inability to exist without it, right? When you don't have it, you're constantly thinking about, should I check it? Where can I get it? Oh, I don't have my phone. I should turn around. I should drive back to my house to get my phone so I can check it, right? It's that uncomfortable like there's two, break it down two ways here, the physical sensations and the psychological sensations, right? People can physically become less settled, maybe more jittery, their heart might race, they're literally going through a state of withdrawal. At the same time, from a psychological perspective, it's all they're thinking about. And if they don't have access to it, they might find themselves in a more negative emotional state. But as soon as they have it, it's like they've gotten that hit and they can calm down, their hands stop shaking, their mind stops racing, and okay, I feel a little bit better now. I've had my pacifier, if you will.
So they're seeking that hit just so they don't feel bad, not necessarily so that they'll feel good.
You are getting at one of the key components here of behavioral psychology. And we're talking short-term versus long-term reward, right? So short-term, it helps them feel good, right? I do this and I feel really good. But guess what? My hunch is that if we looked at your happiness before you ever created a Facebook account compared to now, your overall level of happiness, if you're using it regularly, might be lower. So in the short term, every time you go on, you enjoy it and you think it's really fun. But what we're seeing is over time, your overall level of happiness is dropping and dropping and dropping. And it's really hard for us, as we are very kind of behavioral creatures, to be able to think in the long-term reward pathway as opposed to the short-term reward pathway.
So is social media on some contributing or detracting from human happiness?
Oh, well, I'd say in general, for most people, it's detracting from human happiness. With one caveat, I think during COVID, it's been particularly challenging for many people to stay connected. And so the value of social media has gone up, right? That's how you're not able to fly and see your loved ones. So the ability to share the pictures of Christmas, et cetera, hold a different weight than they did before, right? But what we know is it's not just what is the impact of being on social media, but what are you not doing because you're on social media? People spend hours and hours a day on social media. In years previous, this would be time that they spent calling up a friend, spending more time at the dinner table, right? Going for a run, exercising, all those things that are important pieces of your mental health puzzle that we're just not doing because all of a sudden we're dumping 3 to 4 hours a day into our phones.
And a lot of time, instead of that accomplishment, it's playing a comparison game, which tends not to help people, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it leads to this need to sometimes fake it a little bit. I guess that's the nicest way to say it, right? Oh, they did this. And remember, you're only seeing the best of the best. So what can I show that would be comparable and maybe a little bit better? What we're not showing is the grit, if you will, all the hard work that it took to get there. Trying time and time again. And that is real life. And we're creating very unrealistic expectations as a result.
And what advice do you have for parents for their own social media use to be healthy instead of unhealthy?
So this is challenging because you need to keep in mind as a parent, your children are also watching what you do, right? And so it's not just important for you and your ability to engage with your family, but it's important to show your kids and to mirror to them what healthy behavior looks like. And so I'd say the most important thing, a good starting point, is do not bring your phone to the dinner table. That needs to be a sacred space within the home. That needs to be a place where the children are number one priority. This is really our first school, right? This is the time to talk about the day. How did that go? Was it good? Was it bad? How did you feel? And we actually have studies now showing that kids, even if parents bring their phone to the dinner table and it's face down and they never pick it up, children who regularly have parents with phones at the table are much more anxious and less securely attached in their early childhood years than the children of parents who don't have phones at the dinner table, because the message that it sends is something could happen that could be more important to you. And especially for young kids, that's a very detrimental message. So I think if for parents, we got to take this responsibility seriously. And I think there's a lot of places to cut it out and minimize it. But my number one recommendation is absolutely not at the dinner table. Start there and cut back further if you can.
Francie, are there any resources that you would recommend for parents who want to learn more about this subject?
There's several. What I would say is that from a social media perspective, that really is more going to be individualized. So working pretty closely with your pediatrician, they're going to be a really great resource. And the American Academy of Pediatrics has actually put out several great helping guides for families on this topic. If we want to go back to positive psychology, there's a couple great texts. The University of Pennsylvania actually has a robust research institution. So if you just kind of Google University of Pennsylvania positive psychology, there will be more resources than you know what to do with. But one of my all-time favorite books on positive psychology is actually called The Gospel of Happiness by Christopher Kazar. And he does a beautiful job kind of marrying the overlap between positive psychology and what we learn in our Christian faith, and how positive psychology really is a natural moral theology. And we can use both the Bible and what we learn in science to help us lead more full and flourishing lives.
Francie, do you have any final advice? Although that was awesome, practical advice.
So a couple things. I get a lot of questions about what do we do with our teens, right? Everybody's on this. Who am I to say they can't do it? Things like that. How do we navigate this with our kids? And I will be the first to tell you, I feel you. I am there with you. This is hard, okay? There's a lot of pressure for teens and young kids in general to feel like they fit in their peer group, and you don't want to do anything that will make that harder for them. At the same time, recognizing it's your role as a parent to keep them safe and to form them well. Just like you wouldn't let them run into traffic, even though it's so much fun to run across the street as fast as they can, right? You can't let them harm themselves, even though it's so much fun and it helps them fit in. And we know that the impacts of social media are very detrimental. So while in an ideal world, we could protect our kids from social media for, my opinion would be 25 years, because that's when your prefrontal cortex is done developing. That's when you have a mature brain and you can navigate these things better. That's probably unrealistic, right? In an ideal world, that would be my answer. But I realize these pressures are there. And so really being engaged. If your kid has an account, you should have an account too. You should be watching what they're doing. You should be limiting the time. You should be friends with their friends, right? This shouldn't be an unsupervised activity. And there really should be a realistic set of boundaries and expectations. This is really a gift that you have. We're willing to give this to you. If you can't keep your GPA above a 3.5, it's a privilege that you lose. Or it's not going to be more than 20 minutes unless and then you guys can do your bargaining if you want for certain things. But there needs to be clear boundaries and expectations, with the parents also being very involved in the children's online lives.
Francie, thank you for being with us. This was really well worth hearing. Practical advice like crazy.
Awesome. Thank you, Tom. It was my pleasure to be here.
And thank you, viewers, for watching this episode of Vital Signs, your prescription for a healthy family. Brought to you by the Catholic Medical Association and Shalom World TV. Please join us for our next episode and share the good news of vital signs with a friend, and may God bless you. I encourage everyone to send us emails with questions that you want to ask medical experts. Please email us at vitalsigns@shalomworld.org. Your questions and comments will help us determine what topics we'll cover in the next season of Vital Signs.
All of the viewers of Shalom TV throughout the world, I want to encourage you not only to support this amazing media apostolate, but to spread the word to others. We all know how the internet and mass media are polluting the world with the poison of pornography and so much other forms of materialism. This is the source of eternal life, the gospel, and Shalom TV is consecrated to spreading the word of Christ. Thank you.